The United Arab Emirates says it is withdrawing its remaining forces from Yemen. Saudi Arabia has backed the Yemeni government's demand that all UAE troops should leave. The move comes after Saudi Arabia bombed a port in Yemen, saying it was targeting an arms shipment from the United Arab Emirates. Riyadh says the weapons were intended for a UAE-backed separatist force.
Mukalla port in Yemen smolders after a Saudi-led attack. Riyadh says it was targeting a shipment of arms sent from the United Arab Emirates to a separatist group. The Saudis released this footage purporting to show weapons and combat vehicles arriving at the port and being offloaded from the ship. The UAE denies arms were part of the cargo, saying the vehicles were intended for their own forces operating in Yemen. Yemen's internationally recognized leader, backed by the Saudis, has accused the UAE of abandoning their previous regional alliance.
While we appreciate the former role of the United Arab Emirates in supporting legitimacy, its role has now unfortunately become directed against our great people, as it has provided explicit support for the rebellion and fueled internal strife, threatening our security and stability.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE were allies in Yemen's civil war. After Houthi rebels toppled Yemen's government in 2014, the Saudis have been leading a coalition to stop their advance. But now another separatist group, the Southern Transitional Council, or STC, has caused a rift between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The faction aims to revive the once independent state of South Yemen and have made sweeping territorial gains. The Saudis want to stop their advance and accuse the UAE of backing them. The Emiratis deny the claim, but have announced they are withdrawing all their forces from Yemen after a demand from Saudi Arabia. A tentative sign of de-escalation as shifting alliances threaten to open a new front in Yemen's civil war.
Hannah Porter is an independent researcher and journalist focused on Yemen and the Gulf. Welcome. Hannah, why did Saudi Arabia strike this particular port?
So this is actually the second strike that the Saudis have carried out in Yemen in the past week, both of which have targeted the STC, which is the Southern Transitional Council, and now the weapons shipments that they claim were being delivered to Mukalla port, which is on the southern coast of Hadramaut. So the reason that the Saudis targeted this shipment is because they have been increasingly made nervous and threatened by the incursions of the STC, the UAE-backed STC, into Hadramaut and Al-Mahra. These are two governorates in Yemen's east that have not been under control of the STC up until earlier this month. These are also strategically and in terms of security incredibly important regions for Saudi Arabia as they do border the kingdom. So the Saudis felt that the STC cannot be holding this territory and they've requested a withdrawal, and when that did not happen, they've followed that up with these airstrikes. It appears that that message has been received by the UAE and they have announced that they will withdraw their forces. It's unclear exactly when that's going to happen. And it's also a little bit unclear which forces would actually be withdrawn. The STC, which is made up of Yemenis but is backed by the UAE, may not necessarily be considered Emirati forces, and it seems to me unbelievable that the STC would entirely withdraw. So still it's unclear how this is going to proceed and when this could potentially de-escalate.
I want to follow up on that because Yemen has faced this decade-long conflict between the Iran-backed Houthis and the Saudi-backed government. And Saudi Arabia and the UAE had joined forces in 2015. Why are they now backing different factions in Yemen? You touched on that, but talk a little bit more.
Sure. So I think that even though they joined forces in 2015, it didn't mean that their interests in Yemen were necessarily the same. So The Saudis and the Emiratis have different interests in Yemen because Saudi does border Yemen, and they have historical ties and political ties, and certainly different politics in general. Whereas the UAE is looking to expand its security influence. They carry out what they claim to be counterterrorism missions and counter-smuggling missions in the south. So they just have different interests to begin with. And since the UAE started backing the STC, which was formed in 2017, those interests have increasingly been at odds with one another. So yes, nominally they are opposed to the Houthis, but it has increasingly been the case that there has just been infighting between the so-called pro-government forces. And of course, this is incredibly beneficial to the Houthis, who get to sit back and watch as their enemies or potential adversaries fight amongst themselves.
Now, with the UAE announcement it will withdraw its remaining forces from Yemen, how does that change the balance of power in the region and the future of the conflict?
It really depends on who is being considered UAE forces and when that withdrawal is going to take place. I think it's worth remembering that years ago the UAE claimed to have withdraw all of their forces from Yemen, and that was part of the anti-Houthi coalition. But of course, that wasn't really the case. The UAE has been very present in Yemen in the years since, and has actually expanded their influence. And it's not just with the STC; it's with a number of other militias and political groups as well. So just because the UAE is saying they're going to withdraw their forces certainly does not mean that they are abandoning all of their projects in Yemen and that they're no longer going to have influence. I suspect that there will be talks between the Saudis and the Emiratis. Certainly Oman will want to be involved as well. I expect that they are not very pleased about increased Emirati presence on their western border. So we can expect to see more developments on that front, but what will be behind closed doors and what will be made more public, as certainly these airstrikes were, remains to be seen.
Hannah, very quickly, I want to ask about the people. What are the longer-term humanitarian implications for Yemen's population? They've already been suffering for so many years in one of the world's worst crises.
So this is something that's especially upsetting about this development. The governorates of Hadramaut and Al-Mahra, although certainly touched by war and affected by the poor economy in Yemen, they've been considered to be relatively stable and somewhat protected from the frontline conflict. And now that is no longer the case. Now warfare is very much at their doorstep, at least for now. And that is deeply destabilizing because it does appear that the conflict in Yemen is not being contained. It is actually expanding. So certainly that has huge consequences for Yemenis. And I do feel that Yemenis are not actually being considered in any of these decisions. But certainly it also has repercussions for regional powers as well, not only Oman and the UAE and Saudi, but certainly Iran is watching closely what is happening, as are Gulf powers, and probably wondering where they should side or who they should align themselves with.
Researcher and journalist Hannah Porter, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.